Ava Rossi had always believed survival meant keeping her head down and her debts hidden. But tonight, standing frozen as her manager's hand closed around her arm, she realized survival might cost more than she ever imagined. One wrong word, one refusal, and everything she loved could be destroyed. Then, from somewhere in the shadows, a voice cut through the tension. Calm, cold, and absolute. Unhand her. In that instant, Eva understood the city had eyes she didn't even know existed, and one choice, just one, would ignite a war that would pull her, her sister, and everyone around her into a dangerous game of power, secrets, and vengeance. The stakes weren't just her job, they were life and death. And the man watching, he didn't forgive, he didn't forget. Before we dive into today's story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I love knowing where my listeners are tuning in from all around the world. All right, now let's begin. The dinner rush hit like a storm. Plates clattered, orders flew, the air thick with the smell of seared steak and panic. Eva Rossi moved through the chaos with the practiced rhythm of someone who had learned to hide her exhaustion behind a polite smile. Her apron strings were fraying, just like her patience and her life. Table 7 called for a refill. Table 9 complained about the wine. Marco, the manager, barked orders from the bar, his voice slicing through the noise like a whip. Eva checked the printed receipt in her hand again. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of reserve Cabernet. But Marco had scribbled an extra 0 beside the senator's total. Her stomach sank. That wasn't a mistake. It was theft dressed as service. She stepped toward him between 2 swinging doors. "Marco," she said quietly, "this bill's wrong." He didn't even look up. "Run it anyway." She kept her voice even. "You added an extra 0. Now he looked at her, smile thin as a knife. "That's called a gratuity. The senator won't notice. You want your shift, you process it." Her fingers tightened around the paper. Debt pressed on her chest like a weight. Her sister's medical bills, rent, overdue notices. But she shook her head. "I'm not doing it." The music from the dining room muffled for a moment as the door swung shut behind her. Only the hum of refrigerators filled the silence. "What did you just say?" Marco's smile disappeared. "I said, I'm not charging him more than he ordered." He leaned closer. His cologne stung her nose. "You think you can lecture me? You're a waitress, Rossi. Do your job." She took a step back. "Honesty is my job." The temperature between them shifted from irritation to threat. His voice dropped. "You don't want to start accusing me of anything. You'll regret it." "I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you I won't take part." He grabbed the receipt from her hand, crumpled it, and tossed it into the trash. "You think this place runs on your morals? You think the owner cares how the books get balanced?" His tone carried too loudly. A couple of waiters glanced through the porthole window, then quickly looked away. Nobody interfered. "Keep your voice down," Eva said, lowering hers. "People are watching." Marco's jaw flexed. "Not where we're going." Before she could react, he caught her wrist. Rough, not hurting yet, but a warning. "You and I need to have a little conversation. In private. Let go. Not until you learn how things work around here." He yanked her toward the rear corridor, the one that led to the storage and supply rooms. The hum of the dining room faded behind them, replaced by the clatter of a single leaking pipe and the distant thud of kitchen doors. "Marco, stop!" She tried to twist free. "You don't walk away from me mid-shift." His voice echoed off the tiled walls. "You don't question my system." "I'm not part of your system." He stopped near the service hallway where no cameras pointed. "You think you can embarrass me in front of staff? You think you can make me look dirty?" "Then stop being dirty," she shot back, surprising even herself. His face darkened. "Watch that mouth." She stood her ground, chest heaving. "Go ahead, threaten me. You'll just prove me right." For a second, neither moved. Steam drifted from the kitchen vents above them. Somewhere, a blender roared and cut off. The world seemed to hold its breath. Marco's grip tightened. "You're done here." "Then fire me," she said. "I'll do more than that if you don't shut up." Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Every instinct told her to stay silent, but she refused. "If you touch me again, I'm calling the police." He sneered. "You think the police care about a waitress? About some girl who can't even pay her rent?" She tried to pull free again. "Let go, Marco." He jerked her closer, enough for her to smell the bitterness of his aftershave. "You don't tell me what to—" A shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Marco froze mid-sentence, his fingers still locked around Eva's wrist. Footsteps, measured, deliberate, echoed toward them. The sound carried authority, not haste, the kind of calm rhythm that belonged to someone who was never questioned. Eva turned her head. A tall man stepped from the dim light of the dining room, removing his gloves one finger at a time. His suit was charcoal, immaculate, his expression unreadable. Marco's voice faltered. Mr. Thorne?" Julian Thorne's gaze flicked from Marco's hand to Eva's face. For a heartbeat, silence filled the corridor, thick as smoke. Then he spoke, his tone even and cold enough to stop the air itself. "Unhand her. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2 in the same cinematic format next?" The corridor smelled of bleach and damp tile, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead as if warning of the storm to come. Marco's hand lingered on Eva's wrist for a fraction of a second too long before he felt the weight of eyes on him, eyes colder than winter, sharper than steel. Julian Thorne stepped from the shadows of the hidden booth, tall and precise, a figure that seemed carved from the very architecture of authority. His presence filled the corridor without a sound. The air itself seemed to recoil. Marco's grip faltered. For the first time, he saw the reflection of fear in a man who had never thought to be afraid. He stammered, but no words came out. Julian's face remained unreadable, but his eyes pierced. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The power radiating from him was absolute. Marco's knees almost gave way under it. Eva swallowed hard, her chest heaving, the adrenaline from the confrontation still coursing through her. She hadn't breathed properly since the initial pull. Now she could only watch as Julian approached. "Let her go," Julian said, each word deliberate, slow, weighted. Marco's hand slipped, releasing Eva entirely. She stumbled back a step, rubbing her wrist, trying to will her pulse down from its rapid staccato. Julian's gaze shifted to Marco. The man seemed small, vulnerable, exposed. Julian didn't need to shout. The threat was clear, without words. "Security." He gestured once, precise as a knife's edge. Two men appeared from the shadows, moving with synchronized calm, cordoning Marco off in an almost ritualistic efficiency. Marco tried to speak, tried to plead, but the words fell into the air and dissolved. "Take him to the office. Don't let him out of your sight," Julian said, his voice low, controlled, almost lazy. Yet every syllable carried lethal force. The security team obeyed without hesitation, their eyes locked on Marco as though his very movement might trigger catastrophe. Eva's knees threatened to buckle under the weight of the moment. She had expected reprisal, humiliation, maybe even dismissal. But this was something else entirely. Julian turned his gaze toward her, scanning her face with the precision of a man who cataloged every detail, memorized every expression. She felt exposed, analyzed, but strangely not threatened. "You did the right thing," he said, calm now, almost conversational. The words were a balm and a jolt at the same time. Eva blinked, uncertain if relief or fear was stronger. I know," he interrupted. "What you did, standing up, refusing the lie, reporting the fraud. That's exactly what I need people to do here. Not just follow orders, but recognize right from wrong. That makes you rare." rare. The word echoed in her mind, twisting and sharp. It wasn't flattery, not really. It was an observation, a calculation. Julian's eyes returned to Marco, now struggling against the grip of the security men, futile and desperate. The owner's attention snapped back to Eva. "Tonight you go home, collect yourself. Tomorrow we talk, but remember this, standing up matters." Eva nodded, unsure if she had permission to move or if she was part of a larger, invisible chessboard she didn't yet understand. She gathered her apron, her notepad, and her jacket, every movement mechanical, every breath still shallow from fear and adrenaline. The restaurant around them buzzed as if nothing had happened, the diners oblivious to the quiet earthquake that had just passed in the service corridor. Only the staff knew, and they kept their distance, eyes darting to the man who had made Marco tremble without a single raised hand. Eva made her way toward the door, trying to steady herself, replaying the incident in a loop she couldn't shut off. Every step felt both triumphant and terrifying. A firm hand on her arm froze her in place. She turned to see one of Julian's security men, expression neutral but eyes sharp, like a hawk landing softly on its prey. "Miss Rossi," he said, voice even, "Mr. Thorne would like to see you in his office tomorrow afternoon." Her stomach dropped. Tomorrow. Not later, not after her shift. Tomorrow. That pause, that moment stretched long enough to choke her with questions. She opened her mouth to ask why, to protest, to demand clarity, but the man only gave a small, measured nod and released her arm. No explanation, just direction. Eva walked out into the night, the cool air hitting her face, but her thoughts were a storm. Julian Thorne, the owner, the man who had made Marco tremble. And now he wanted to see her, of all people. Her mind raced. Was it curiosity? Suspicion? Some test she had yet to understand? Every scenario carried risk. Every possibility carried danger. As she reached the car, the streetlights throwing long shadows, she felt it. The world had shifted. Something had moved, and it wasn't just Marco. Something larger, more powerful, had taken notice of her, and tomorrow she would step straight into the eye of it. Eva's calm night is over. The next day promises confrontation with a man whose reach and control could change everything. Julian Thorne wants to see her, and she has no idea why. The city slept under a blanket of neon and fog, but in the penthouse of the Verona restaurant, sleep was a luxury no one dared indulge. Screens flickered in the dim surveillance room, casting cold blue light over Julian Thorne's angular features. He sat in the command chair like a general surveying a battlefield, eyes scanning numbers, faces, and movements in real time. Leo, his consigliere, stood over a bank of monitors, dark circles under his eyes betraying the long hours spent untangling webs most men wouldn't even dare to touch. A muted hum of computers and air conditioning filled the room, punctuated only by the faint click of a mouse or the low groan of servers working overtime. "Marco's numbers don't add up," Julian said without looking up. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of a storm. "He's been siphoning cash for months. Almost seamless, almost elegant." Leo swiveled a monitor toward him, fingers brushing keys like a pianist. Elegant is one word, criminal is another. Look at this pattern. Transactions layered through shell accounts, falsified supplier invoices. He wasn't acting alone. Julian's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Leo tapped a few commands, and a spreadsheet populated the largest screen. Numbers, dates, and names formed a tangled lattice of deceit. "Notice the external account," he said. "Marco is a small node. The real strings are coming from someone else, someone who knows the restaurant's books as well as you do." Julian leaned back, rubbing his temple. The city below twinkled innocently, oblivious to the slow rot being uncovered inside the walls of his empire. "Vance," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It has to be Silas Vance. Only he has the patience and the resources to orchestrate this over months without leaving a trace. Leo nodded. Exactly. He's been using Marco as a pawn, flooding the restaurant with doctored records. The goal is hostile takeover, and he's counting on the chaos Marco creates to weaken your position. If left unchecked, he'd have control within weeks. Julian's fingers drummed against the armrest. Weeks. The word tasted like ash. He had built this empire from the ground up, every restaurant, every property, every connection meticulously crafted. And someone like Vance thought he could dismantle it with paper and numbers? It was personal now. Leo's expression shifted subtly, a mixture of admiration and concern. There's more. He's been careful but sloppy in one area, payroll. Marco didn't realize someone like Eva was keeping quiet records. Julian's gaze sharpened. Eva? She's meticulous, Leo continued. Even under stress, she tracks numbers, notices discrepancies, and keeps a personal log. It's clear she's been documenting Marco's misdeeds, and unwittingly, Vance's strategy. She's uncommon, sir. Julian's eyes narrowed, scanning the footage again. Eva moving through the restaurant with quiet purpose. Her pen scratching against a small notepad, every action measured, almost imperceptible, but vital. Every small note she made now looked like a puzzle piece, waiting for him to fit. Leo minimized the surveillance and brought up digital financial reports. Lines of numbers and charts scrolled rapidly, almost hypnotic in their complexity. Sir, we can trace Marco's deposits back to intermediary accounts, but the origin points to Vance's shell corporations. He's trying to obscure the money trail so it looks like internal fraud rather than external sabotage. Julian leaned forward, fingers steepled. External, yes, but the end game is internal collapse. Marco is nothing but a distraction. Vance wants me weakened before he hits with full force. He paused, eyes flicking to the screens that showed the empty restaurant in the early morning. And he underestimated one thing: loyalty and observation. Leo smirked faintly, though the humor was dry and sharp. Which brings us back to Eva. She wasn't just in the wrong place at the right time. She's been quietly recording Marco's patterns, his manipulations, his fraud, everything. And if we play this right, she can be the lever we use to pry open Vance's plans. Julian's eyes didn't move from the screens. His voice was low, dangerous, almost thoughtful. A lever, yes. But we need to know what she's capable of. One mistake, and Vance will exploit it. One slip, and both Marco and she could be casualties. Leo hesitated, then navigated through the system, bringing up Ava's personnel file. The screen flickered, revealing details she had never been asked to disclose. Her resume, background checks, and notes about her education scrolled past. Sir, Leo said, tone heavy with quiet astonishment, you should see this. She was a finance student at Columbia before she dropped out. Brilliant, analytical, capable of tracking financial flows with precision that borders on obsession. This changes things. Julian's jaw tightened. He didn't speak immediately, letting the data sink into his mind. A smile, faint and unreadable, ghosted across his lips. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't approval. It was calculation, recognition, and a spark of something far more dangerous. Possibility. Columbia, he murmured. A mind like that, wasted on waiting tables yet perfectly positioned to untangle Vance's web without realizing the full power she holds. Leo watched him, wary but trusting. We need to approach carefully. If she suspects manipulation, she could back away. But if guided, she could be the key to dismantling everything Vance has built, piece by piece. Julian rose from his chair, pacing slowly, the rhythm deliberate, measured. The hum of monitors and servers mirrored the pulse of his mind. Every angle, every move, every potential betrayal calculated in seconds. She doesn't know it yet, Julian said almost to himself, but she's about to become the most dangerous ally or the most exploitable weakness in this war. Leo leaned closer, lowering his voice. Sir, there's one more thing you should see before we act. Julian stopped, turning sharply. His eyes, sharp and cold as winter steel, met Leo's. Show me. Leo pulled up a hidden subfolder within Eva's file, encrypted, overlooked by everyone else. Her journal. Months of notes documenting Marco's transactions, observations, and suspicions. If this gets in the wrong hands... His voice trailed. Julian didn't need the warning. He had already seen the threads forming, the puzzle taking shape. Get it ready, he said quietly, eyes dark with intent. We're going to use it, and her, wisely. Timing is everything. Leo hesitated, then finally spoke. The words slicing through the hum of machines. Sir, you should see this part too. Eva, she's not just meticulous. She understands the bigger picture. This isn't a child playing detective. This is a trained mind, and she's been documenting the entire setup as if she knew exactly who the enemy is. Julian's gaze sharpened. Perfect. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the words carried lethal weight. Prepare for tomorrow, because when she sees the full scope, she won't know who she can trust. Leo's finger hovered over the next command on the keyboard. The screen flickered, highlighting a single line in Eva's personnel file, the detail that would change everything. Sir, Leo said, voice low, almost reverent, you need to see this. She was a finance student at Columbia before she dropped out. Julian's eyes narrowed. The faintest smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. The storm was about to begin. Eva's seemingly ordinary background is revealed to conceal extraordinary capability. Julian now knows the power she could wield, and the battle against Vance is about to escalate. But she has no idea how central she's about to become. The elevator groaned as it ascended to the 10th floor, rattling loose a string of thoughts that Eva couldn't quiet. The hallway outside her apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet and the lingering scent of last week's takeout. Her apartment was modest, a single room with peeling wallpaper, a kitchenette that had seen better days, and a bed that sagged in the middle like it had given up long ago. She dropped her bag on the floor with a soft thud. The apartment was quiet, but silence here wasn't peace. It was suffocating. Every sound outside her window, the distant wail of sirens, a barking dog, the muffled arguments of neighbors, pulled her attention, a constant reminder that the city moved on while she struggled to keep her life together. Lena's wheelchair waited in the corner, draped with a faded blanket. The plaster cast on her right leg glinted under the harsh light of the lone ceiling lamp. Eva's younger sister had been injured in a car accident 6 months ago, a tragedy that had rewritten every plan Eva ever made. Lena's recovery was slow, expensive, and merciless. Insurance covered a fraction. The rest was a mountain of medical bills that seemed to grow overnight. Eva crossed to the small desk by the window, cluttered with unopened envelopes, past due notices, and a single lamp that flickered intermittently. She pulled open the bottom drawer, revealing a neatly stacked collection of notebooks. One, in particular, was her lifeline. The cover was worn, edges bent, corners frayed. Inside, every line was a thread in the web she had been quietly spinning for months. Her pen had tracked every irregularity in the restaurant's financials, transactions that didn't match orders, tips that vanished, inventory discrepancies. Marco's misdeeds were cataloged with meticulous precision. Each page was a silent rebellion, a way for her to assert control in a life that felt otherwise dictated by debt, obligations, and fear. She flipped to a recent entry. The handwriting was small but sharp, almost clinical. Friday night senator's order inflated by $1,200. Marco instructed servers to submit falsified receipts. Cameras on that hallway are disabled. Observation. Manager reaction aggressive. Risk. High if confrontation occurs. Ava closed the notebook, pressing it against her chest. It was more than documentation. It was evidence, a quiet weapon she carried alone, invisible to everyone except herself. The city outside her window was a blur of neon and car lights. She could almost feel the pulse of the restaurant there, the hum of diners, the clash of orders, and the tense undercurrent of danger she had barely survived. Lena shifted slightly in her chair, wincing at the dull ache of her leg. Eva moved to her side, brushing a strand of hair from her sister's face. "I've got this, Lena," she whispered, more to reassure herself than her sister. "I'll figure it out, somehow." Lena nodded, eyes tired but trusting. Her faith in Eva was absolute, and it weighed heavily on her. One wrong move could shatter the fragile stability they had built in this apartment, in this life of scarcity and constant struggle. Eva's phone lay face down on the desk. She reached for it, hesitating, her thumb hovering over the screen. Bills, deadlines, schedules, they all demanded attention. She ignored them as she returned to her journal, running her fingers over the meticulous notes. She allowed herself a rare moment of pride. Each observation, each calculation, was proof that she wasn't powerless, not entirely. Her mind replayed the confrontation with Marco over and over. The fear, the defiance, the rush of adrenaline. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She knew she had done the right thing, but the consequences could be brutal. A manager like Marco didn't forget humiliation, and Julian Thorne, the restaurant owner, well, he was something else entirely. She didn't know what his involvement would mean yet, but she sensed a presence, a weight behind him that extended far beyond the restaurant. She scribbled a few more notes in the journal, updating figures, annotating observations about Marco's behavior, and speculating on motives. It was exhausting work, and yet for the first time in months, she felt a measure of control over the chaos around her. Then the sharp vibration of her phone broke the fragile silence. Eva froze. The caller ID flashed boldly on the cracked screen. Verona Restaurant. Her breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed a warning. This was no ordinary call. The night's events, Marco's aggression, Julian's sudden appearance, it all surged back in a wave of anxiety and anticipation. She stared at the screen, hand trembling slightly. Could it be a threat? A test? Or worse, a summons that would pull her back into the eye of the storm before she was ready? The city's neon light flickered across her face as she hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. Every scenario ran through her mind. Every possibility felt dangerous, every outcome uncertain. Her phone vibrated again, insistent, impatient, as if echoing the unspoken truth she already knew. Nothing in her life was about to stay simple. With a deep, steadying breath, Eva swiped to answer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" The call from Verona Restaurant signals that Eva's involvement is far from over. The storm Julian has set in motion is closing in, and she's about to be pulled deeper into a world of intrigue, danger, and power. She's only beginning to understand. Eva's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the restaurant's main entrance, each step echoing louder than she expected. The midday rush had long subsided, leaving a quiet that felt unnatural, almost conspiratorial. Her chest tightened. Every nerve in her body warned her. Today, she would pay for her defiance. The glass doors opened to reveal the empty lobby, soft light spilling across the tiled floor. A single security guard nodded at her and gestured toward the private elevator. "Mr. Thorne's office," he said simply. No explanations, no small talk, just a silent path into the unknown. Eva's stomach churned. She had imagined this moment countless times on the walk to work. Marco finally getting his revenge, her career ending in embarrassment, or worse. But reality was different. Reality was quiet, tense, and dangerous in a way that no daydream had captured. The elevator ride was brief, yet each second stretched endlessly. Her reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman tense, alert, aware of every potential threat. She had faced Marco, faced fear, but Julian Thorne. Julian was another level entirely. When the elevator doors opened, she was met by an antechamber of marble and soft lighting, a room that whispered wealth, power, and control. The guard stepped aside without a word, opening the heavy oak door into the inner sanctum of the restaurant's owner. Julian's office was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city below, a network of streets, neon lights, and distant sirens. The decor was minimalistic yet intimidating. Dark wood panels, a sleek desk of polished ebony, and a single leather chair where he sat, back straight, posture perfect. Every detail signaled authority, calculated and deliberate. Julian rose as Eva entered, his eyes assessing her with an intensity that sent a ripple of awareness down her spine. Not a casual glance. This was scrutiny, the kind that dissected thought, intention, and potential. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a chair opposite his desk. Eva obeyed, careful not to flinch under the weight of his gaze. "I've reviewed what you did," he began, voice calm, measured, yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "The journal, the notes, your meticulous tracking of Marco's activities. Tell me, what made you do it?" Eva swallowed, choosing her words deliberately. "I couldn't let it happen. Not on my watch. It's wrong to steal from people, from the restaurant. I couldn't just stand by." Julian leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Morality," he murmured, almost to himself. It's rare to see someone act purely out of integrity in a place like this. Most bend, compromise, calculate how to protect themselves. He studied her, sharp eyes tracing every subtle movement, every flicker of expression. I don't have much choice," Eva admitted, voice steady. "I have responsibilities. My sister, my life." She hesitated, realizing how much of herself she was revealing. But Julian didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. He was listening. "Responsibility can be complicated," he said finally, "but courage is always evident. It's transparent." Eva's pulse quickened. There was an edge to his words, a sharpness that reminded her she was not in a casual conversation. This was assessment, calculation. He wasn't just evaluating her actions, he was measuring her mind. He tapped a key on the desk. A screen lit up, displaying her journal entries in digital form, scanned and analyzed. "Impressive," he said. "Your attention to detail, your ability to notice patterns where others see only chaos. This isn't just diligence, it's analytical skill." Eva's lips pressed together. "It's necessary. I've had to survive, to protect my sister, to keep our life together." Julian's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly at the mention of Lena. "I see. Survival. Duty. That explains more than most would assume. You are not just a witness. You are capable, strategic, observant, dangerous in the right hands." Dangerous. The word sliced through the tension in the room. Eva felt it, understood it. He wasn't threatening. It was recognition, a warning, a measurement of potential. He reclined slightly, letting the silence linger before continuing. "You understand systems, manipulation, and incentives. You can track deceit, predict moves, and anticipate reactions. All of these are rare qualities, and extremely useful in situations far beyond a restaurant." Eva's throat tightened. She didn't know if she wanted to hear what was coming. Yet every instinct told her that turning back now wasn't an option. Julian's gaze locked on hers. "I could fire you. I could let Marco continue. I could let the restaurant and you remain exposed. But I don't think that's necessary, do you?" "No," she said softly, almost without thinking. "Good," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Because what I'm offering is not a return to the status quo. It's not a safe position behind the serving line. What I'm offering is an opportunity. a chance to act decisively, to strike where it matters, and to correct wrongs that go far beyond simple theft. Eva's heart raced. Every nerve in her body screamed caution. She didn't fully understand the scope of what he was proposing, but she could sense the gravity, the risk, and the power that radiated from him. Julian leaned forward, eyes narrowing with a deliberate intensity. "I'm not giving you your job back," he said, each word measured, precise. "I'm offering you a new one. Help me destroy Marco and the man pulling his strings." Eva froze. The sentence hung in the air, heavy, charged, impossible to ignore. Her mind reeled. She had expected punishment, perhaps warning, but this? This was an escalation she hadn't anticipated. "Do you understand what that entails?" Julian asked, voice low, almost intimate, yet undeniably commanding. "This is not a game, not a test. This is a move that will make enemies, force choices, and challenge every assumption you've ever held. One wrong step, and it could destroy you, or worse, those you care about." Eva's fingers clenched into her lap. She had faced Marco, faced fear, faced danger. But Julian Thorne was another level entirely. He didn't just wield power. He commanded it, measured it, and expected precision in return. I understand," she said finally, voice steady, though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. Julian leaned back again, smirking faintly. "Good. Then we'll see how far your courage and your intelligence can take you." For the first time, Eva realized that her life was no longer defined by tables, orders, or debts. It was about strategy, survival, and alliances in a world she was only beginning to glimpse. The weight of the decision pressed on her, but there was no turning back. The die had been cast. Eva now stands at the threshold of a dangerous new reality. Julian's offer is a game-changing escalation, and accepting it will pull her into a battle far beyond the restaurant, against Marco, Silas Vance, and forces she cannot yet see. The office felt colder than usual, though the city sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Julian's suit was immaculate, tailored to a perfection that seemed to defy the chaos outside. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on Eva as she perched on the edge of the leather chair. Every movement, every breath felt measured, deliberate. "Do you understand why you're here?" Julian asked, voice low and commanding, but calm enough to suggest a conversation rather than an interrogation. Eva nodded, though her stomach knotted with unease. She had expected intimidation, perhaps a warning, but not strategy. Not yet. Not the kind that made her pulse accelerate without even realizing it. "I need you to become part of the plan," Julian continued. "But first, you must understand what the plan is and what role you play." Eva's eyes narrowed. "I'm listening." He leaned back, gaze unwavering. "Marco thinks he has you cornered. Vance thinks the same. Both believe they control the situation, that you are insignificant. That's where we use the advantage." Eva frowned. "Advantage?" Julian's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "We make them see what they want to see. We play the game they think they're winning. You will appear powerless, vulnerable, fired, humiliated, expendable. Publicly, you will be their victim." Eva blinked, confusion and alarm mingling with her racing thoughts. "Victim? You want me to act like I've lost everything?" "Yes," Julian said, each word deliberate, slicing through the tension. "You must become the human trigger. Marco and Vance will make mistakes. They always do when they think they've won. Every misstep, every overreach, every slip in their confidence can be exploited. That's when we strike." Eva's pulse quickened, the weight of it pressed down like a lead vest. "And if something goes wrong," Julian's gaze didn't waver, "we anticipate everything. Every risk is accounted for, but it requires your cooperation and your trust. Are you capable of that?" Eva hesitated. She had survived Marco's aggression, navigated the chaos of debts, and protected her sister for years. She had documented every injustice with precision. But this was different. This wasn't hiding mistakes. It was baiting the most dangerous men in her world. I can do it, she said finally, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Good. Because we will not allow Vance or Marco to dictate the terms. This is our move, calculated, precise, and lethal in its timing. He tapped a series of keys on the sleek desktop, bringing up surveillance footage from the restaurant. The grainy images flickered across the screen, showing Ava moving among tables, Marco barking orders, staff scurrying to keep pace. "This is your stage," he said, voice calm but intense. "You will exit the restaurant in a way that confirms their assumptions. Tears, frustration, visible defeat. Every detail must be convincing. They will believe they've succeeded, and while they're distracted, we gather the information, expose the fraud, and dismantle their network, step by step." Eva's mind raced. It was audacious, dangerous, brilliant. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on her shoulders. One misstep, one hesitation, and she wouldn't just be a pawn, she could become a casualty. Julian observed her carefully, as if weighing her resolve. "You're not just a pawn, Eva. You're the lever, the trigger. Without your participation, Marco and Vance maintain the illusion of control. With you, we rewrite the rules of the game." She swallowed, gripping her notebook in her lap. "I understand. I'll do it." A faint nod from Julian. "Good. Tomorrow, your public dismissal. Remember, every tear, every tremor, every word. It must be believable. Marco must feel invincible. Vance must believe he's untouchable. Only then will they reveal themselves." Ava exhaled, a slow release of tension that had been building for weeks. She stood, adjusting her jacket, her resolve hardening. "I'll be ready." Julian's gaze followed her as she moved toward the door, quiet, deliberate. He did not smile, did not speak. His mind was already several steps ahead, anticipating every angle, every move, every betrayal. As she reached the threshold, Julian's head of security appeared from the shadows, leaning close to whisper, voice low and urgent. "Sir, we've detected a tail on her. Vance already knows who she is." Julian's eyes narrowed, sharp and cold. "Prepare the contingency. No one interferes with my plan. Not him, not anyone." Eva paused, unaware of the silent danger closing in behind her. The city outside the office windows seemed suddenly darker, more threatening, as if the night itself had taken notice of the war she was stepping into. The game had begun, and the first move was hers. Eva agrees to the plan, becoming the human trigger in Julian's scheme. But an unseen tail and Vance's awareness mean danger is already on her trail. Her every move is now being watched, and the stakes have just become deadly. They staged the fall like a play whose audience would decide the outcome of a war. Eva walked through the dining room with the practiced gait of a woman who had learned to vanish into the background. Tonight, however, she wore an armor of hurt. Makeup blurred at the corners of her eyes, strategically applied to look raw. Her voice trembled at just the right moments. She let the pain be visible, immediate, and convincing. The regulars noticed. Whispers traveled faster than the servers. Heads turned, forks paused mid-bite. Marco stood beside the host station, chest puffed, the victory lighting his face like a cheap bulb. He mouthed words to the staff, reassurance and scorn braided together. He knew the cameras weren't watching the corridor where he'd grabbed her. He knew the owner had been in the booth. He had been given permission to believe he'd won. Julian had instructed small things: the tempo of her exit, the cadence of her voice on the way out, the way she would allow one of the servers to hand her a check that had been accidentally inflated for dramatic effect. Everything was choreography. Every tear, every flinch, an instrument to make the opposition comfortable in their false security. Eva moved through it all with a kind of clinical detachment. The truth did not live in the tears she shed. It lived in the notebook tucked deep in the lining of her jacket, the pages full of figures and dates she had rewritten for safety in her own hand. On the surface, she was a crack, a weakness to be exploited. Beneath, she was the blade Julian had sharpened in private rooms and late-night briefings. When the doors opened for her, the night air hit her face like a slap. Cameras and phones lifted in stations and booths. She could feel the invisible lenses of the city sweep her silhouette, hungry for scandal. Marco followed, theatrically close, whispering something loud enough for the host and the barback to hear, an accusation wrapped in a sneer. "She's been stealing from us, caught red-handed." The staff watched with a mixture of relief and fear. Marco's reinstatement had been the predictable part of the plan. He strode like a man who had reclaimed territory, like a dog returned to a table of bones. He was rewarded with quiet applause from staff who wanted to stay on his good side. He basked in it and let the illusion of control swell him until he looked dangerous again. Outside the front, a pair of hired drivers waited in a nondescript van. They were told to be visible, part of the bait. Cameras from across the street caught the scene. A distraught young waitress being escorted into the night by security, tears on her cheeks, voice breaking into sobs. It was all intentionally obvious. The message was simple. The employee resisted, the manager prevailed, the owner turned his back. Eva climbed into the van with the same calm she had practiced for hours. The safe house was a 2-bedroom apartment in a less polished sector of the city. Enough distance to be convincing, close enough for quick extraction. The driver shut the doors. He did not speak. He did not need to. The plan demanded silence. Inside the apartment, the lights were dimmed, a couch with an Afghan thrown over it, a kettle on the stove. It smelled faintly of something antiseptic and reheated food. The windows had blinds that didn't fully close. A deliberate imperfection to make the place feel temporary and believable to anyone watching. Eva set her bag down, feeling the pinch of isolation immediately. Julian's people had been precise. A bed, an unlocked drawer with a spare change of clothes, a phone that worked but had limited service. Enough to make her feel safe, but not enough to grant her autonomy. She understood the theater. She was both bait and shield. They had given her a role and a room. At first, the solitude was tolerable. She made instant coffee and sat with her notebook, cataloging the small things she'd seen on the floor. Marco's rounding of totals, the odd supplier invoices, the names and numbers that matched lines in her ledger. She turned the pages like a detective tracing the arc of a story she had always suspected, but never had the means to prove. The safe apartment amplified quiet. Every small sound became loud. The building's radiator, a siren down the street, the thin click of her pen. The walls felt close. The room felt smaller than the theater of the restaurant. It was a strange inversion. Out there, she had been spectacle. In here, she was invisible. Loneliness pressed in. Being isolated felt like another instrument Julian had tuned to make her feel vulnerable. She thought of Lena, of the way her sister had learned to laugh through pain. Lena's leg was mending, slowly and stubbornly, but the medical bills kept arriving, each envelope a new calculus of choices. Eva could have run. She could have refused to be used as bait. She could have chosen safety over strategy. Instead, she sat at the small table and wrote down the next steps. She forced herself to rehearse the grief she had displayed outside. She practiced the catch in her voice, the tightened throat, the way to let panic edge into anger at the right beat. She had to sell it. She had to make Marco and Vance believe they had broken something important. Convincing them meant coaxing them into reckless decisions. The first night in the safe house passed slowly. She drifted between sleep and watchfulness, waking at small things, a building creak, a distant shout, the scuff of a shoe on the pavement below. She told herself the scuff was regular city life and tried to convince her body that it was safe. She tried to be grateful for the guarded invisibility that meant messengers could come and go without being noticed. She recognized the numbness that settles over a person playing a long game, an emotional anesthesia that helps you do the unacceptable without dissolving into fear. Julian's plan required a kind of professional detachment she had only recently cultivated. It was necessary and expensive. On the third day, she allowed herself a small indulgence. She opened the curtains fully and let in a slice of noon that washed the old couch and the potted plant in the window. She called Lena and kept the conversation simple, light updates about medication and physical therapy. Lena chattered about an episode of a show she liked. The ordinary rhythm of it felt like an anchor to sanity. They laughed. They both pretended the world wasn't fragile. But the laughter didn't last. Around dusk, the safe house hummed with subtle changes. The radio played at low volume in the living room. Food deliveries arrived and were removed without fanfare. Julian's team visited, brief and businesslike. Tweaks in routines, reminders of appearances she would make if called, and the small protocols of staying alive when playing a part in something bigger than herself. Loneliness sharpened to a new edge, being used and protected in equal measure. Julian's men watched over her like predators disguised as shepherds. They were efficient, and their kindness had an economy to it. She knew she couldn't trust them wholly, but she also knew the alternative. Walking the streets alone while Silas Vance's network crawled through the city was more dangerous. The phone in the apartment was a different breed, not hers, not connected to her normal life, but monitored. Julian had explained that to her in the office. Communication channels would be strict. She could call Lena. She could call Julian's people when instructed. She could not roam. She could not let the bait become the trap. The trade-off felt raw. She had given up freedom for the chance to strike at those who had hurt her and others. She had traded autonomy for leverage. The moral math in her head spun. Was it worth placing Lena and herself at risk to expose Vance? Was the possibility of justice worth the uncertainty? Then, late one night, when the apartment's dim lamp threw long shadows on the wall, her breath hitched. The phone she had been given buzzed against the table. It was a different number, a digital tone she had not heard before. Her chest tightened. She picked it up, expecting a check-in from Julian's team, a coded message, anything that would mean the plan was proceeding as intended. The screen showed an unknown number. The message preview was short, clinical, and merciless. "Stop talking, or your sister gets hurt." For a moment, the room contracted. Sound removed. The words hung like a guillotine, simple, precise, a blade with no flourish. The safe house felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner. Eva's stomach dropped into a place reserved for terror and cold, rational calculation. She read the message again, as if repetition might dissolve the reality of it. It did not. The sender, anonymous, cloaked behind a virtual number, had chosen the most vulnerable lever available, Lena. They had bypassed the bait and aimed for the heart behind it. Ava's fingers trembled. Her journal lay open on the table, pen uncapped, a list of next steps half-written. She understood, with a clarity that felt like ice, that the stakes had moved beyond strategy and theatrics. The war was no longer an abstract plan of exposure and leverage. It was personal, close, and immediate. A dozen new calculations began to form in her mind at once. Who could know Lena's address? Which of her movements had been observed? Had someone followed her from the restaurant before the staged dismissal? Or had Vance's men been watching long before the plan began? She felt the old, familiar panic pulse in her throat. But beneath it, a cooler current ran, determination sharpened by fear. This threat had the same structure as the fraud she'd documented, a precise pressure point, exploited for intimidation. It revealed a new facet of the enemy, willing to cross lines, willing to use family as collateral. The phone's screen glowed in the dim, declaring the message was not a mistake. It was a targeted strike designed to paralyze. Eva put the phone down slowly and folded her hands over it as if that small act might contain the tremor in her limbs. She knew she should call Julian's people. She knew the security protocols. Report threats immediately. Don't respond. Await instruction. But she also knew the algorithms of terror. Sometimes the first move had to be personal and quick. Waiting could mean a lost window. Her eyes moved to the bedroom where Lena slept, a small silhouette under the blanket, deep breath smooth and trusting. Eva crouched, watching her sister's chest rise and fall, seeing in that rhythm everything she had fought for and would continue to fight for. The room no longer felt like a safe place arranged by careful hands. It felt like a battlefield marked with invisible tripwires. The trained systems around her, Julian's security, the safe house protocol, suddenly seemed not omnipotent but vulnerable to the kind of dirty tactics she had witnessed documented in her notebook. She reached for the journal and flipped to a page where she had planned contingencies, routes to hospitals, backup contacts, coded phrases for emergency extraction. Pages she had written down in theory were suddenly the scripts of survival she might have to enact in haste. Her hand hovered over the phone once more. The logical part of her brain cataloged options. Call Lena and warn her to leave. Call Julian and report the message. Contact the police and risk exposing the operation, or do nothing at all and gather more evidence to use as leverage. Each choice created splinters of risk. Then she saw, in the dark window's reflection, a shadow move across the building opposite. It was quick and indistinct, a patch of darker gray against the night. Or maybe it was only a trick of light. She could not tell. She could not allow herself to be unsure. She had entered the plan as bait. Now the hunters had adjusted, shifting from bait to direct threat. The rules had changed. Eva's breath steadied. Fear sharpened into resolve. She would not be paralyzed by the message. She would not let Lena become the currency in this fight. But she also understood the cruel arithmetic of the game. One wrong move could cost them everything. She closed the journal and set it into her bag. She checked the window again and again, cataloging exits, noting the time it would take to reach the car, the speed she could achieve. The sound a door made in flight. She rehearsed the lie she might have to tell Lena to get her out. Calm, unflappable, convincing. She mapped the safest route from the apartment to the hospital 2 blocks away, and another, less obvious route that swung through a neighboring building and out a service door. Julian's arrangement had given her a temporary sanctuary, but now it was a stage under a new spotlight. The bait had worked. Marco had taken the prize, but Vance had learned the name that mattered and struck at the only place he could hurt her, where the armor was thin. Her phone buzzed again. A different, unknown number. She pulled it toward her with hands that no longer trembled. The message was a reminder and a promise, written in the same cold logic. Stop talking, or your sister gets hurt. She stared at the words until the letters blurred. For a moment, the only sound was the building's pipes and Lena's breathing. Eva understood then, with a certainty that rang like metal. The war had become immediate. Julian's chessboard had flipped into a battlefield, and the next move would determine whether they had set the right trap or walked into another one. She tucked the phone away. There was no time for doubt. There was no room for hesitation. Outside the safe house, the city pulsed on, oblivious. Inside, the clock continued its slow, merciless count. Alone in the safe house, Eva receives a threatening text message from an unknown number. Stop talking or your sister gets hurt. The night air hit Eva like a physical force as she slipped out of the safe house. Her hands were clenched around the strap of her bag, her breath sharp and deliberate. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that promised danger rather than rest. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, every flicker of light a potential threat. She ignored the tight knot of fear in her stomach. Lena's safety wasn't theoretical. It wasn't part of a plan. Every text, every shadowed threat weighed on her with crushing immediacy. Julian had rules, strategies, a plan, but right now, none of it mattered. Her sister's life was on the line. The city felt unfamiliar in this late hour. Usually, the hum of cars and chatter of passers-by provided a rhythm to her movements. Tonight, the absence of routine was deafening. Eva moved quickly, methodically, taking streets she knew only from observation and instinct. Avoiding cameras and pedestrians, relying on memory more than technology. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the screen lighting her hand in a cold glow. She ignored it. Julian's security team would call if absolutely necessary. She didn't need reminders. She needed action. Every second wasted was a second Lena could be in harm's way. As she approached the familiar block where Lena's apartment stood, Eva's mind raced. The building was the same as always, dull brick, narrow stoop, faint lights flickering from half the windows. She knew the entrances, the side doors, the fire escape, every route in and out. Yet tonight, every familiar landmark carried a weight of urgency and dread. She slowed briefly at the corner, scanning the street. A black sedan sat half-obscured under a flickering streetlight, engine idling. Her heart skipped a beat. The shape was too deliberate, too stationary, too much like the vehicle she had trained herself to recognize in surveillance footage. No, not now. Not when she was this close. Eva pressed herself against the shadowed wall of a closed store, watching. Two men stepped from the vehicle, movement precise, deliberate. Black coats, faces partially obscured, hands at their sides. They were heading straight for her. Her pulse quickened, but her mind clicked into survival mode. Years of observation, months of meticulous planning, and weeks of reading threats like lines on a ledger converged into instinct. She noted exits, distances, reaction times. Every detail mattered. She ducked into a side alley, pressing herself against the rough brick, hoping the shadows would conceal her. Her heart pounded, but she could hear them approaching. Footsteps, the scrape of shoes against concrete, the soft whisper of a threat in motion. Eva thought fast. She had options. None were perfect, none without risk. She could run, but the sedan could trap her at the corner. She could climb the fire escape, but she risked being spotted. She could confront them, but two men trained for intimidation were hardly a fair fight. Decision made, she bolted toward the nearest cover, a narrow passage leading behind a small cafe. The sedan shifted in position, tires squealing against the asphalt as the men accelerated. The chase was no longer theoretical, it was physical, urgent, alive. Julian's voice echoed in her mind, not literally, but in fragments of every briefing, every strategy session, every warning about the cost of impatience. Every move has a consequence. Think before you act. But there was no thinking, only moving, only surviving. She reached the fire escape ladder, fingers gripping the cold metal, scraping against rusted bolts as she climbed. Behind her, the men reached the passage, their footsteps echoing like predators' paws on stone. One leaned over the railing, trying to spot her. Eva scrambled to the roof, heart hammering, lungs burning. She kept low, moving across the slanted metal like a shadow herself. Every step was calculated, precise, but fear sharpened her senses to an unbearable edge. Below, the men regrouped, splitting to cut her off. Their coordination told her Vance had anticipated her route. They weren't random. They were deliberate, trained, expecting, and dangerous. Eva's eyes scanned the rooftops ahead, a narrow gap, just enough for her to leap. To reach the next building's ledge, a calculated risk, but one she had no choice but to take. She launched herself, muscles coiling and releasing in perfect tension. The impact jarred her, metal railing biting into her palms, but she caught the ledge. Breath rasping, she swung herself onto the roof and crouched, heart hammering in her ears. The men reached the edge of the previous building, voices raised in frustration, realizing their quarry had slipped through their fingers, at least for the moment. Eva didn't wait to see what their next move would be. She darted toward the stairwell leading to Lena's apartment, mind racing with contingencies. When she finally reached the familiar hallway, adrenaline still surging, she paused. Each door was a potential trap. Each sound outside could be an intruder. She slid the key into the lock. Slowly, listening. The lock clicked, and she pushed the door open, heart hammering. The apartment was dark, quiet. Lena's silhouette was visible in the faint glow from the street outside. Relief crashed into Eva briefly, only to be replaced by icy awareness. The threat had followed her this far. Vance's men had already proven they could anticipate her actions. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, trying to mask the panic coiled in her chest. Every instinct screamed caution, every nerve a signal of imminent danger. She had reached the destination, but she knew the journey wasn't over. Then, a screech split the night. A black sedan tearing to a halt beside the building. Tires screamed against asphalt, engine growling like a predator ready to strike. Eva's stomach sank. Through the window, she saw movement. 2 men, purposeful and menacing, stepping out of the car. Their eyes locked on her building, on the apartment, on her. Eva's breath caught. Every calculation, every escape route she had prepared had led to this moment. And the fight she had prepared for in theory, the plans, the contingencies, the careful orchestration of Julian's strategy, was about to become flesh and blood reality. The night had narrowed to this: the black sedan, the 2 men, and her. Just as Eva reaches her apartment building, a black sedan screeches to a halt beside her, and 2 men get out, heading straight for her, escalating the war and forcing her to act fast or risk everything. The street smelled like wet asphalt and hot brakes, the city's neon bleeding into puddles. Tires squealed, voices snapped like broken wires, and for a long beat, the night was nothing but the pulse of engines and a dozen small, terrified decisions. When the black sedan's doors opened, the 2 men moved like trained silhouettes, efficient, blunt, the kind of men who knew how to close distance and take control without fuss. They cut across the sidewalk with purpose, eyes fixed on the building where Lena lived. Their stride said they expected no surprise. They were the surprise. Eva's hands were already gripping the banister as she rounded the stairwell, Lena's elbow hooked in the crook of her arm. She moved shallow, fast, 2 shadows slipping through a dim hallway, every step a negotiation with panic. She didn't shout. She didn't make noise that would telegraph their fear. Movement was better camouflage than trembling. A figure detached itself from beneath the streetlight, a tall man in a long coat, boots quiet on the pavement. He stood where the men would pass, arms folded, as if the night had sculpted him there. The man's presence stopped the 2 intruders in mid-stride. They didn't slow from caution. They slowed because someone larger than caution had entered their map. Authority spelled out in posture. Before either of them could decide whether this was a confrontation or an ambush, sleek black SUVs blocked the road. Doors snapped open, and men in tailored coats spilled out, rifles kept low but visible, tools of deterrence, not slaughter. The street narrowed into a theater of standoff. No gunfire, not yet. The kind of escalation that belonged to men who preferred to end things with leverage rather than noise. Eva's stomach hollowed. This was the sort of street-level calculus that spun quickly into consequence. She pressed Lena behind her, feeling the small, steady weight of her sister's body, and realized with a bitter clarity that she'd misjudged the scale of what they had touched. Vance's reach was not rumor. It was muscle, and it was now probing. 2 of Julian's men stepped forward, voices flat, hands where we can see them. It was a command that assumed obedience, and for a moment the world held its breath. The intruders hesitated, tested what advantage intimidation might still win them. They were professionals, not fools. They scanned the SUVs, the men in coats, the neat rows of faces that could, with a nod, swing from warning to violence. The calculus shifted. Julian emerged then. No swagger, no theatrics. He simply moved into the open, and the shape of the night rearranged itself around him. He wore a coat that swallowed the lines of his suit. He didn't need to shout. His voice dropped into the space like something heavy and inevitable. "Back away." The older of the two intruders laughed once, brittle and quick. "You shouldn't have come, Thorne." There was a tone of challenge in him, Silas Vance's kind of bravado, but it sounded thin next to Julian's calm. Julian didn't smile. He stepped forward, one measured pace, and the man's laugh died. Men who had never been afraid of consequences suddenly remembered they could be made small in other people's hands. Julian's proximity suggested a history of consequences, the kind that broke careers and reputations without a single headline. "Leave them," Julian said, "now." For a second, it seemed like they might trade words for lives. The air hummed with potential violence. Then, carefully and like a bad plan being folded away, the two intruders melted toward their sedan. They moved with the practicality of men who judged the odds and decided discretion served them better than conviction. Engines coughed, tires spun. The sedan slid into the street and vanished into the drizzle. Julian watched it go without triumph. There was no gloating in his face, only the cold efficiency of someone who had just deflected a strike and cataloged the consequences. "Get them inside," he said to his men, turning to Ava and Lena. His voice was softer now, an instrument tuned to safety. "Now." They moved with practiced speed. Two of his men enveloped them in a shield of bodies, leading them away from the sidewalk and through a back entrance into the restaurant's basement service corridor. The lights hummed overhead. The clatter of pans and the world of the kitchen felt absurdly domestic after the metallic edge of the street. Inside, Julian's team ran standard checks. Quick scans of the faces on the security monitors, review of license plates, a sweep of entrances and roof lines. No detail was too small. Everything got cataloged, cross-checked, and filed for action. Eva watched it all with a strange, detached interest. She'd been the bait. The plan had worked. Until it hadn't. Now the game had changed color and pitch and no longer felt theoretical. Leo arrived, breathless from the sprint, data in his hands and a face like thunder. "They were professionals," he reported, voice clipped. "Two men on the payroll of an external operator. They knew the building plan." He let that sit, heavy and accusing. They weren't random. Julian absorbed the news and made a single motion that made the room quiet. He unhooked his coat and draped it over Lena's shoulders as if the gesture could erase the cold. "You'll be stayed with me until this is resolved," he told Eva, blunt and immediate. "No more safe houses for now. It's compromised." "No," Eva said before she could stop herself, anger vibrating the word. "You put me there." "You didn't have to go," Julian countered, tone level but not unkind. "You chose to move for a reason no one could refuse." She opened her mouth. Defiance, plea, logic, then closed it. The truth was a blade without a handle. She had followed instinct and broken protocol. That had been her choice, and it had endangered Lena. The gravity of that reality landed like a physical weight. Julian's hand tightened into a fist. Vance is no longer a competitor. He's a threat. This escalates things. He tapped the side of his nose as if to punctuate the thought. He's shown he will use family as currency. That word, currency, hung in the air and tasted like bile. To Julian, leverage was data. To Vance, family was a bargaining chip. The moral boundary had shifted. They moved fast then. The kind of controlled motion that spoke of resources and ruthlessness. Julian's people secured Lena in a private wing, a room with sounds masked, an entrance off limits to prying eyes. Medical staff checked Lena's leg, supplies were verified, and a thin line of reassurances were passed between professionals who understood how to contain panic. Julian stood in the kitchen doorway, the back of his head to the room, and watched his team flit like a precise machine. Eva sat at a metal table, fingers finding her notebook, running them over the page like a litany. She had brought this danger into Lena's life, and the gratitude for being shielded fouled her stomach. Leo stepped up, dossier in hand, the edges of paper like the teeth of a saw. "We traced the sedan's plate to a shell in the Bronx," he said. "From there, funds route through 2 firms connected to Vance's holding companies. He's getting sloppy or he's testing us. Either way, this is deliberate." Julian's expression closed like a lid. He moved to a small back office, shutting the door, and for a moment the muffled noise of the restaurant muffled the city into background static. He opened a drawer with a slow hand and removed a leather-bound dossier, thick, heavy, and labeled with the kind of meticulous cruelty Julian reserved for enemies. The name on the folder was underlined twice: Silas Vance. He spread the file across the desk. Corporate records, photos, discreet bank transfers, blacked-out pages where discretion had been paid to keep ugly facts quiet. Every scrap of evidence Julian held was curated for humiliation and eradication. This was not just a business ledger, it was a roster of vulnerabilities. He had spent the better part of a decade cataloging men who could be broken. Leo waited for the reaction. Julian's jaw worked. His hands didn't tremble, but his knuckles blanched. The line had been crossed, not a ledger error, not a hostile takeover disguised as accounting. This was a willing step into cruelty. "He crossed the line," Julian said at last, voice low, hardly above the hum of the refrigerator. He flipped through a page with photos of Vance's holdings, properties, corporate officers, philanthropic fronts that hid darker ledgers. "Burn it all down. I want every one of his assets, every dirty secret exposed by morning." The sentence landed like an order and a verdict both, and Leo's eyes sharpened. This was no negotiation. This was retaliation designed not just to wound, but to erase. For Julian, business was a chessboard. For Vance, it had become a playground where he thought consequences measured less than profit. Julian now would make sure profit came at a price. Eva listened from the doorway, the weight of the words driving cold clarity through her. The line Julian had drawn in the sand was not rhetorical. It was a border now etched in strategy, and they had just stepped across it. The war had become personal, and there would be no going back. Back at his penthouse, a furious Julian looks at a dossier on Silas Vance and tells Leo, "He crossed the line. Burn it all down. I want every one of his assets, every dirty secret exposed by morning." The city never sleeps, but tonight, the streets seem to hold their breath. Every corporate tower, every office with blinds drawn, every penthouse high above the neon wash of traffic, pulsed with anticipation. Julian Thorne moved through his penthouse with a calm intensity that belied the chaos he had orchestrated below. The dossier on Silas Vance lay open on his desk, a roadmap of leverage, exposure, and destruction. Leo hovered near the edge of the room, tablet in hand, eyes sharp and attentive. Every update, every movement in Vance's empire was fed directly to them. They had already begun the systematic dismantling of a man who thought he could play without consequences. Julian did not move fast. He moved with precision, a predator in control of both hunt and prey. "I want the financials frozen," Julian said, voice low but hard, a steel undercurrent threading through every word. "Every account under Vance's control, locked, audited, traced. Leave no asset unexamined. Make his empire bleed transparency." Leo nodded, fingers flying across the tablet. "The shell companies are being traced now. We're cutting off offshore assets first. The banks don't know yet which accounts to freeze." Julian leaned back, watching the city lights ripple across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every illuminated office, every glowing street was a node in a network that he intended to control. Vance had underestimated the scope of Julian's reach, the meticulous layering of intelligence and strategy that had allowed him to thrive undetected in the shadows of the city's business elite. Meanwhile, Eva watched from a corner, her notebook open, notes from months of silent observation, now a weapon in the hands of the man who had saved her sister's life. Her mind processed the scale of what was unfolding. Marco had been a minor irritant, a distraction in the grand scheme. Vance was the true target, and Julian's plan was no longer just about exposure. It was about annihilation. Eva's phone buzzed quietly. A message from Julian's security team confirming Lena was safe and being relocated to a secure facility. Relief was a fragile, fleeting thing. She understood now that her role in this war was not just as a participant, it was as an instrument, a lever pulling events into motion that neither the enemy nor the city itself could predict. Julian's next orders were surgical: press releases, covert leaks, the exposure of corporate misdeeds, all timed to destabilize Vance publicly, while Julian's team executed a financial coup behind the scenes. Within hours, accounts were frozen. Private investigators found discrepancies in Vance's charitable fronts, and insiders were exposed to the press under careful anonymity. News feeds lit up with stories of unexpected bankruptcies, sudden resignations, and financial audits launched in the wake of corruption allegations. Vance's carefully curated public persona began to crumble. Analysts speculated, investors panicked, and the man who had believed himself untouchable suddenly found his empire under siege on every front. Marco's arrest came swiftly, a final reminder that Julian's network reached into law enforcement and legal systems with uncanny precision. Eva's months of documentation had provided the final threads of evidence needed for prosecutorial action. Marco, who had once threatened her with impunity, now faced the consequences of choices that seemed small at the time, but were devastating in aggregate. Yet even as the fallout spread across the city, Julian's attention was never distracted. He watched the map of Vance's holdings, the dominoes falling in real time, calculating not just the immediate collapse, but the long-term implications. Every asset seized, every secret revealed, every subordinate exposed was a message. Julian Thorne did not forgive, did not forget, and did not relinquish advantage once obtained. Eva, standing slightly apart, felt a strange mix of awe and unease. Julian was a man who operated above the ordinary scales of morality, combining intellect, ruthlessness, and charisma in a way that left no room for hesitation. She had played a role in this intricate machine, yet she could feel the weight of Julian's presence even when he was silent, a force of inevitability that could consume as easily as it could protect. Hours passed, and the war's immediate battles concluded. Vance was publicly humiliated, financially crippled, and internally fractured. Marco was behind bars, facing legal repercussions that ensured he would think twice before crossing another line. The streets of the city resumed their pulse, unaware that the balance of power had shifted so drastically overnight. Julian finally turned to Eva. His expression was unreadable, a mask that held a promise both reassuring and unsettling. "You've done well," he said, voice smooth, controlled. "You played your part precisely. The enemy is neutralized, at least for now." Eva swallowed, still catching her breath from the adrenaline and tension that had defined the past days. "And what now?" she asked, cautious. She had survived, played her role, and contributed to the collapse of dangerous men. But there was an undercurrent she could not ignore. Julian's intensity suggested that this war, while won, was far from over. Julian's gaze held hers, sharp, measured, and uncompromising. "The problem, Eva," he said, pausing as if weighing each syllable, "is that a man like me, when he finds something truly valuable—" His eyes locked onto hers, unwavering. "He never lets it go." Eva felt a chill she could not name, a recognition that the conclusion of this battle was merely the opening move in a different kind of war, one she could neither predict nor fully control. The victories were real, the enemies vanquished. Yet the stakes had shifted. Trust, loyalty, and survival had been rewritten, and the personal calculus of power now included her. The city outside glittered, indifferent, while inside Julian's penthouse, a plan beyond immediate comprehension began to take shape. Julian's mind worked relentlessly, already projecting the next moves, the next manipulations, the next targets, his empire expanding quietly, even as Vance's collapsed spectacularly. Eva, notebook in hand, knew she had stepped into a world where winning and surviving were not enough. One misstep, one lapse of judgment, and the delicate balance of power could tip, and she could be consumed in the fallout. Julian moved toward the window, staring at the streets below, the city sprawling like a living chessboard. "We've won tonight," he said softly, almost to himself. But the game is just beginning. Even in victory, there was the sense of looming inevitability. Vance was defeated, Marco was neutralized, but the city, the power, the hunger for control, it never slept. And neither did Julian. Eva's pulse quickened. She had survived, she had contributed, she had played the role expected of her, but she knew, with an uneasy certainty, that her life was now entwined with Julian's in a way that offered protection and danger in equal measure. The night stretched long, a city of lights and shadows, as the victors planned quietly and the defeated licked wounds they could barely comprehend. And high above, in the penthouse, Julian Thorne allowed himself a small, imperceptible smile. A man who knew that when power was seized completely, the world bent to the will of the one willing to hold it without hesitation. Julian's victory is complete, but in the final moment he ominously declares that the game is just beginning, hinting that Eva's role and her life are now deeply entangled in his personal ambitions, leaving the audience on edge for what comes next.